There we are. Now, Edgar, I'm Dr. You're here today because you confessed to a crime. Your lawyer is suggesting you were not of sound mind at the time. It is my job to evaluate that claim. It says here in the report that you became stark raving mad during the initial interrogation, speaking in an old English accent and acting quite nervous.
True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I tell you the whole story.
Oh, it was almost impossible to interview him. I realized fairly early on in the interview that the best I could do was just let him speak. But was I scared of him? I suppose yes. But oftentimes I felt more bewildered than anything. You've obviously seen the tape. You've seen the way he speaks, the way he carries himself. He was, how do I put it, outdated and clinically creepy.
It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever.
Yo, the Edge murdered his dad? I don't know. That's about as surprised as I can act. That dude was creepy as hell. So that's what happened to him. We called him the Edge because we figured he was always on the edge of something, but we didn't know what. And because it's close to Edgar.
Now this is the point. You fancy me mad.
Well,
Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep.
I can tell you I didn't like the way he kept saying thrust. I remember feeling very uncomfortable. I could take it the first time, but then the second time was almost immediately after, and well, it left me on edge, wondering if it was going to happen again. I wanted to leave that room, but I was young and had something to prove, and it was my job to stay.
It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye.
Okay, that's weird, because that's exactly what he called the security camera that was focused on his section. For some reason, he thought they were motion activated, so he didn't move if he didn't have to. He'd just stand there, motionless, watching the camera. The thing is, I don't even think they were real cameras, but I still gave them the finger every once in a while just in case they were.
And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moved more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. And perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close-fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily.
It's important to note how he compares himself to a watch, as if believing himself an extension of time or beyond it. Also notice his use of repetition. That, paired with how slowly he speaks, is what turned this hour-long interview into a 2-hour one. I was able to bill double for that.
I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in his bed, crying out, "Who's there?" Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief, oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart.
I don't know what he knew, or what he didn't know, or what exactly was stirring up in his bosom, but I knew that was strike 2 for Mr. Chuckles.
I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in his bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him, and it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room.
That's classic Edge behavior. He was a starer, and he loved doorways. He'd never come all the way into the break room if other people were in there. He'd just stand in the doorway and watch. Eventually, a complaint was launched, and he wasn't allowed in that hallway for a month. Another weird guy was fired at the same time, so it was a little confusing which one was fired and which one was banned. Steve collected money for a bet, but I don't think he ever paid out, come to think of it. The point is, you still felt like the Edge was there, even when he wasn't.
When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern, So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily. Stealthily until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it, that chilled the very marrow in my bones, but I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And now have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now I say, there came into my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage.
Let me tell you a little something about courage. It doesn't come from a watch or a drum or whatever he said. It comes from deep in here. Courage is overcoming the fear of failure, the fear of defeat. Courage is taking a job that you are not at all prepared for because no one else will do it. There's not a drum in this entire world that would make me do that job. Needing medical insurance was my drum.
Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst.
To be honest, I didn't even know he had a tattoo, so I don't have much to say about that. He did have good hearing, though. This one time a customer dropped in the middle of the store. As people were getting help, I asked the Edge if he thought the person would be all right, and he just said, "It's still pumping." I thought he was just trying out some new slang, but now I'm thinking he could hear things through that tattoo. Weird.
And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body.
Unsurprisingly, no, that was not the missing puzzle piece in determining my final assessment.
The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been way too wary for that. A tub had caught it all.
The tub was actually a silent auction prize from a company Christmas party. He spent $100 on it, even though he was the only bidder. I think I won a TV VCR combo. Probably paid a bit too much for it, but the extra money goes toward the birthday cake fund.
When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises.
Funny story. One of my buddies from high school was one of the guys there that night. We talk every once in a while. We talked about our involvement with this case, and he told me the story Edgar tells isn't true at all. Me and this buddy of mine actually used to be pretty tight. We had plans to go to school and to the academy together, until I found out that you can't join the police force if you have a backwards foot, so he went on without me. Bye, good luck, I said. But I was devastated. Rachel left soon after. Funny story.
And their presence made you uneasy?
I smiled, for what did I have to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them, at length, to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things.
Probably about how cool their job is and how much fun it is to shop for shoes.
But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone.
Dude, no one's gonna notice if you get even more pale, man.
My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until, at length, I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently, with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do?
I do know that voice, though. He'd get that way with customers sometimes if they asked too many questions. Real loud and kind of desperate. All you could do was back away and let it happen. We lost a lot of business because of that. Less work for me, though, so whatever.
I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder
Edgar,
and louder,
calm yourself.
louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard. They suspected, they knew, they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now, again, hark! Louder, louder, louder,
Edgar?
louder. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the flanks. Here. It is the beating of his hideous heart.
That was the end of it. Final thoughts? What is there to say? Edgar obviously was and is a disturbed man, but how could I deem him unfit to stand trial? He's adamant he is sane. His story, while likely filled with flights of fancy, has remained consistent. I think it's better for everyone that he be locked away. I'm not sure how much effect long-term treatment would have on rehabilitation. I think he's in the best place possible.
Final thoughts? Well, I'll be fine. To be honest, now that we've had some time apart, I think it's best that she and I broke up. We had different goals and aspirations. Ultimately, we were after different things. As for joining the force, I don't know. That's a dream I've already woken up from. Oh, Edgar. I don't care what the doc said. That guy was batshit insane. I feel safer just knowing he's locked up.
I haven't thought of the Edge in a while, but all things considered, he wasn't the worst coworker. To be honest, him leaving really helped me out on my way up the corporate ladder. You're looking at the new assistant supervisor of Section 2. It's one of the better sections. He probably shouldn't have killed that guy, though.